Picture this. You're taking a lovely, peaceful walk through a charming little village. One second, you're buying a warm pretzel at a bakery in Germany, and the next, you step off the sidewalk, cross a paved bicycle path, and, without flashing a passport, without going through any kind of security checkpoint, your feet are suddenly planted in an entirely different country. I know, it sounds bizarre, right? Kind of like a glitch in the Matrix. But this is actually a very real, everyday occurrence in Monschau, which is this picturesque town in Germany. Running right through the middle of it is the Vennbahn. It's a former railway line turned bike path, and legally, that thin strip of pavement belongs entirely to Belgium. Because of this single paved path just slicing right through the landscape, 5 tiny bits of Germany are completely cut off from the rest of their motherland. They are literally stranded as geographical islands floating in a Belgian sea. It's a completely surreal situation to try and wrap your head around, but as we're about to see, it is far from the only one out there.
Hello and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here. Okay, let's dive into this because we are going to explore one of the absolutely most fascinating and honestly confusing quirks of human geography, the weird wild world of enclaves and exclaves. We'll be looking at territories swallowed whole by other nations, orphaned lands disconnected from their homes, and just the sheer geopolitical chaos that history has left right on our modern maps.
Here is a quick look at our agenda for the Explainer today. 1. The weird world of borders. 2. Enclaves versus exclaves. 3. The Matryoshka doll enclaves. 4. How did this happen? And 5. Daily life in fragmented lands.
Starting right off with Section 1, the weird world of borders. So when most of us picture a map of the world, we imagine neat, clean lines separating sovereign nations. You know, like a perfectly painted puzzle. But the cartographic reality is actually a messy, highly complex geopolitical mosaic. Our maps are literally riddled with pockets of isolation. Take Gambia, for instance. Aside from a small slice of coastline leading out to the Atlantic Ocean, the entire nation of Gambia is completely wrapped up inside the borders of Senegal. Think about what that actually means for a second. If you want to trade with anyone besides Senegal or travel anywhere by land, you have absolutely no choice but to cross their borders. It creates this isolated pocket, a territorial anomaly that completely defies our standard logic of how countries usually just sit side by side in neat little blocks. And sometimes, these pockets of isolation are incredibly small. 842. That is the tiny population of Vatican City, an independent state nestled entirely within the city of Rome, Italy. In fact, Vatican City is one of only 3 true national enclaves in the entire world, meaning it's a sovereign country completely surrounded by just one other country. So how did that happen? Well, it managed to avoid Italian unification in the 19th century, which eventually resulted in the Lateran Treaty of 1929. The Pope and the Italian government essentially sat down and made a political compromise, agreeing to carve out this tiny 100-acre sovereign bubble. And today, it sits as the world's smallest sovereign state, totally landlocked and bordered by Italy on every single side.
Moving right along to Section 2, enclaves versus exclaves.
Okay, so we keep throwing these terms around. Let's break down this academic jargon into really simple concepts. What exactly is the difference? The definitions are distinct, but they're intimately related. An enclave, spelled with an EN, is a territory that is completely surrounded by the territory of one other state. An exclave, with an EX, is a part of a state that is geographically separated from its main part, essentially orphaned from its motherland. A super helpful rule of thumb to remember. All true enclaves are exclaves, but not all exclaves are enclaves. Imagine a piece of land separated from its home country, but it touches the borders of 2 different foreign nations, or maybe a foreign nation and an ocean. Because it's not totally surrounded by just one country, it would be an exclave, but not an enclave.
The really crucial point here is that whether a piece of land is an enclave or an exclave often simply depends on whose side of the border you were looking from. Think about the concepts of an immigrant and an emigrant. If you pack up your life and move from France to Canada, you're an emigrant from the perspective of the people you left behind in France, but an immigrant from the perspective of your new neighbors in Canada. It's the exact same person, just a different viewpoint. In the same way, an enclave is looking inward from the perspective of the surrounding host nation, while an exclave is looking outward from the perspective of the distant motherland that legally owns it.
Let's picture a mainland, and we'll call it M. Then imagine a surrounding state called S, and a tiny orphan territory called E. Notice how E is completely borderlocked by S. It's physically trapped. It has absolutely no way to physically reach its mainland without crossing through foreign territory. It is a true enclave to the surrounding state and a true exclave of the mainland. It's like a missing puzzle piece dropped right into the middle of the wrong box.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the exact theory plays out in the real world with Libya.
Livia is a Spanish town, completely orphaned inside the French Pyrenees Mountains. To get from mainland Spain to Livia, a Spanish citizen has to cross the international border, drive a few kilometers through France, and then cross back into Spanish territory. For Spain, Livia is an exclave. For France, it's an enclave inside their borders. The story behind this is absolutely fascinating, by the way. Back in the 17th century, the Treaty of the Pyrenees required Spain to cede all of its villages in that region to France. But local leaders in Livia pointed to an ancient decree and argued that, technically, they were a town, not a village. So, by a brilliant linguistic technicality, they stayed Spanish, leaving them permanently stranded inside France. I mean, what a loophole.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Matryoshka doll enclaves.
Fair warning, things are about to get very Inception-like. Imagine you have a piece of country A inside country B. Now, what if inside that piece of country A, there's another, smaller piece of country B? It's a second-order enclave, a nested territory, just like those beautiful Russian wooden Matryoshka dolls, where you open one up only to find another, smaller doll sitting right inside it.
And this isn't just a quirky theory. It actually happens in reality. Let's head over to the Arabian Peninsula. There is an Omani territory called Madha, completely surrounded by the United Arab Emirates. It's a standard enclave. But inside Madha, there is a tiny village called Nawa, which belongs back to the UAE. This double enclave situation happened about 70 years ago. Local tribal elders literally sat down in the 1930s and 40s to draw these lines based on personal friendships, local rivalries, and allegiances. One cluster of villages chose to align with Oman, but the village right in the middle of them decided their loyalties lay with the UAE. And just like that, a mapmaker's nightmare was born out of local friendships.
Now prepare yourself for the ultimate border anomaly. Up until recently, there was a third-order enclave, a counter-counter enclave, called Dala Kagrabari. It was a piece of India, situated inside a piece of Bangladesh, which was inside a piece of India, which was itself entirely surrounded by Bangladesh. It was the only third-order enclave in the world, an absolute Gordian knot of geography. Just think about the pure practical madness of this for a second. If a resident of that innermost piece of land wanted to visit their own mainland of India, they would have to pack their bags and cross an international border 3 separate times just to get to the country they actually live in.
You might think, okay, surely these are just one-off mistakes, but researchers have documented a staggering 32 of these second-order enclaves worldwide. Can you even imagine the headache of doing the municipal paperwork for 32 nested puzzle boxes? They are most notably found in areas between Belgium and the Netherlands, and historically between India and Bangladesh. The sheer absurdity of 32 of these geopolitical anomalies existing across the globe is, honestly, truly mind-blowing.
On to Section 4. How did this happen?
Which naturally brings us to the obvious question we are all asking. How on earth did these messy, convoluted borders come to be? Well, there's no single answer, but rather 3 main historical causes. First up, feudal land swaps. In medieval Europe, borders weren't drawn by sweeping national identities, but by which local duke or lord owned which specific farm. They would just trade lands to settle debts or forge marriages. As modern nations slowly formed around these ancient, chaotic property lines, the patchwork just remained. Second, deliberate political border drawing. When the Soviet Union drew lines in Central Asia, they purposely created mixed ethnic enclaves to break up regional power blocks and prevent uprisings. Or when colonial empires collapsed, administrators hastily drew lines on a map without ever actually visiting the territory. Finally, nature itself sometimes creates borders through geographic anomalies, moving rivers or washing away land bridges.
Speaking of nature, a fantastic example of a geographic anomaly is the Kentucky Bend in the United States. Back in 1812, a massive series of earthquakes violently shifted the course of the Mississippi River. The river basically rerouted itself, cutting off a tiny peninsula of Kentucky and leaving it totally separated from the rest of the state. Today, the Kentucky Bend is an exclave, completely surrounded by Missouri and Tennessee, with a whopping population of exactly 18 people. Imagine being one of those 18 people. You share a state government and state laws with people hours away, but you literally have to drive into a totally different state just to buy milk or get your mail. And finally, Section 5, Daily Life in Fragmented Lands. So, we've talked a lot about the maps and the history, but I want to bring it back to the human element. What does it actually take to survive, govern, and live day to day when your town is a geographical orphan? Governance in these areas relies heavily on what political scientists call functional integration. The practical needs of daily life simply have to override the strict legal boundaries. For example, the German enclave of Busingen is entirely surrounded by Switzerland.
The residents are German citizens and pay German income taxes, but for everyday life, they are seamlessly integrated into the Swiss network. They pay for their groceries in Swiss francs. They even have 2 different postal codes for the exact same houses, one Swiss, one German. Similarly, the independent microstate of San Marino is entirely dependent on its host, Italy, for its electricity, water supplies, and waste management. You simply can't survive isolated in a foreign land without intense, cooperative infrastructure sharing.
To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with this really profound quote from the research paper, The Geopolitical Mosaic. Survival depends on the delicate art of maintaining 2 identities within a single shared space. These enclaves and exclaves are not just fun trivia facts to bring up at dinner parties, they are powerful testaments to human resilience and cooperation. Every single day, the people living in these fragmented lands must negotiate the space between invisible political lines drawn on a map and the practical reality of their everyday lives. It really makes you wonder, if a simple bicycle path can split a town across 2 nations, what other invisible borders are shaping the way we live today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.